And the crazy thing is that even though we had one of the hottest economies in the nation for the last decade, we have only scraped our way back to the point where the buying power of schools today is still $572 million less than it was in the 2008 before the Great Recession. That's $600 per pupil. And the fact is that our current fiscal structure just made it impossible for us to catch up, much less get ahead and make the kind of investments we know we need to make in teacher pay and technology, career technical education, preschool, mental health, all the other supports that our kids need to succeed. And of course, that has consequences. And, you know, just a couple of those are that Colorado has literally the least competitive teacher wages in the nation. That's comparing what teachers can make in teaching compared to what they can make in other professions for which they are qualified, and also just comparing what they make to the cost of living. We also have the most 4-day weeks, the highest percentage of 4-day week schools in our state. And that includes now districts, big districts like Pueblo and Brighton. So that was before COVID. What are we expecting the legislature to do? We talked about that $3.3 billion number. And this graph is that previous graph, only it's showing what is expected, how deep the cuts might be how deep the cuts are going to be after the legislature is done balancing the budgets as they have to do. This is, at the moment, the number we've heard is $724 million cut below where we are now, or another $800 per student. We are going to fall far, you can see that green bar, far, well below where we were in the worst years after the recession. I think it's really important to note the legislature does not want to do this. There's also slashing higher education and healthcare and cutting support for roads and cutting the pay of state employees. There's really no part of the state budget that isn't getting cut, but they have to balance the budget. But I want to say we did not ask you here tonight to get you scared or depressed or to get angry. There is a way to prevent these cuts that the legislature is talking about from becoming permanent. There is one way to do it, and that is by giving the voters of Colorado the opportunity to vote on what kind of Colorado we want next year and 10 years and 20 and 30 years from now. That way, to give the voters the ability to create a better Colorado, to make sure that these cuts aren't permanent and that we can grow when our economy gets better, it is Initiative 271, known as Fair Tax Colorado, on the ballot. And we got to get it on the ballot, and we have to get it passed. And, you know, 3 months ago, if somebody asked me, I would have said, oh, we'll get it on the ballot. There is no question we're going to get this thing on the ballot because we've done it before with Amendment 73. We have people all over the state ready to go. There are all kinds of school gatherings to happen. We had 5-6 months to do it. So we're going to get it on the ballot. But if it got on the ballot, are we sure that it could get passed? You know, that's always been the question in Colorado. Well, now it is completely flipped. And if we can get it on the ballot, you know, obviously COVID has thrown us such a curve, and we've lost a couple of months where people were staying at home, and just now people are able to reach out to new people. But if we can get it on the ballot, now I know we can win. In just the last 3 weeks, we have seen polls that show absolutely consistently, different folks doing those polls, that the voters of Colorado, the vast majority, including the majority of all parties and every part of the state, prefer a fair tax, a tax that makes sure that everybody pays about the same percent of their income in state and local taxes, which is not the case now. They want to see higher tax rates on higher incomes instead of these kinds of cuts. 7 out of 10 Coloradans want that to happen. We absolutely can make this happen. The wind is absolutely in our sails. We just have to get it on the ballot, and it's not going to happen on its own. That's why we're so thrilled to have all of you here today. We have to do this together. Someone else isn't going to do this. We have to do it, and we can do it. So the main message that I would leave you with tonight is don't get mad, get signatures. So I'm going to kick it back to Annalise, where you're going to hear, instead of just these big numbers of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, what these cuts could mean to the people who are going to be most affected by them.
Thanks, Lisa. Man, I'm energized after that. I'm just like ready. Don't get mad, get signatures. I actually have my petition and I'm getting signatures this week. Definitely respecting the COVID, safer at home policies. But like Lisa said, without further ado, I will like to introduce our first speaker, Rick Brewer, who is currently a doctoral candidate and an assistant principal athletic director at a public school in Colorado. So if you would like to hear from Rick, stay tuned. Here we go. And Rick, you have the floor. Go ahead.
All right, sweet. Thank you all for having me. Just want to thank Lisa, Betsy, and Annalise for putting such an awesome program together, and the rest of the team at Greater Education Colorado. Definitely want to give a shout out to you all for having such a fantastic mission and getting our young folks prepared to live their best lives. I love to see that on the site, and then also your mission to really harness the power of grassroots activism in order to impact that change. I think, and I'm paraphrasing there, but I think that's a very powerful movement. In education, during COVID, our primary focus has really been on 4 major buckets, and that's technology, access, engagement, and equity. I find it rather disturbing that we were able to close a 2-decade technology gap in a matter of 7 days. Through just sheer willpower and determination. So now all of our students in the district have one-to-one technology, at least from 6th grade up to 12th grade. And if they did not have internet access, they now have that as well. So that was a primary focus, and that is a bonus. And it's just unfortunate that it took a world pandemic in order for us to get there. So it's amazing to see what we're capable of when the right amount of pressure is applied. The next piece is focused on access. I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen is that a lot of our students who weren't necessarily able to access education, as it were in the traditional fashion, we were able to see tremendous gains in their levels of access in this particular fashion on electronic platforms. So our primary focus was making sure that our students had ease of access in these platforms. We primarily focused on using the Schoology app. Some schools used various apps, but this particular app showed us that our students were able to log in and engage. Engagement was the next piece. The major focus there, we had around an 80% engagement rate, which was about 3% lower than our traditional attendance rate on our level. But we were able to see a big increase in the number of celebrations for our students. And one of the next pieces that was really concerning around this was, how are we going to serve our students with diverse needs and mental health needs as well? So we did a tremendous campaign of outreach, including home visits if needed, for students that weren't engaged on that level. And then we were able to come in contact and make visits with 100% of our students. The last piece and the final piece was equity, really focusing on closing the gap for marginalized populations. So a big fear is that a lot of the marginalized populations that weren't able to access education in the first place, was that gap pressed forward. And that's one thing that we will not know. But I will say, for our special education department, they went above and beyond to to present lessons live to our students and to have that FaceTime with them, although electronic. A lot of our students in the general education population did not have that opportunity. A lot of the classes were either pre-recorded or assignments were just determined ahead of time. So just moving forward, I think a big concern for us in K-12 education is going to be funding. And we're going to have to use our voices in order to ensure that that funding is not cut in a manner that furthers the gap for those marginalized groups. As you mentioned, Lisa, we're in the bottom percent of funding nationally. And so this is going to be an uphill battle for us, I believe, particularly now that we have what I would call an excuse to continue to marginalize those populations. So it's going to be up to us and the people with those voices in order to help move the needle in funding for our at-risk populations. And I hope I didn't take too much time. So thank you.
Thanks, Rick. No, I appreciate you highlighting definitely what work has been put in from your perspective as an administrator and putting in those long hours to ensure the access that you mentioned. I definitely appreciate hearing that, but also you highlighted what we do know. There's been tech gaps for decades, we know, and so equity has been an issue. And coming from a special education background as well, I can appreciate the work that those teachers have been doing to make accommodations according to FAPE and their IEPs. So I would like to hear from Mr. Rob Sanders, Superintendent of Buffalo School District, RE4J, and take it away.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? Thumbs up?
Yes, and I appreciate your photo.
We are the Rams, you know, so have a little bit of school pride here and put that out there. But, you know, first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for having this tonight and having this important conversation, because we've been faced, I've been a superintendent of schools in Colorado now for 10 years in the same district, and I don't think I've ever presented my board a budget that was not a deficit spending budget in 10 years. This next year is going to be a very extremely difficult one. So first of all, I'd like to thank Great Ed and Betsy and Lisa and Susan and everybody that has been put behind this Initiative 271, because, you know, as you know, we worked really hard on 73, and we thought we had some really good things going there. We still believe we have some good things going there. But this is our hope in the field. And so when I start talking about where the rubber meets the road, and this is where it is, what I'm going to talk about is Merino specifically, but this is rural Colorado. And I think that in this situation, where when we talked about Amendment 73, we talked about economies of scale, and we talked about, you know, the DPSs and the larger school districts across the state that did have a little bit of more wiggle room inside of their budgets, versus those of us in rural Colorado who have to deal with smaller numbers. And so when I talk about this, we can extrapolate this over to any small school. And I'm really worried about those that are 100 or less. Because when we start talking about those school districts that are 100 and less, yeah, they might be getting $14,000 per pupil. But the reality is that $14,000 per pupil does not go near as far as it does at $8,000, $9,000 per pupil in the Front Range. And so when we talk about Merino, it's about rural schools in particular. So like I said, I've been the superintendent of schools there now for 10 years. We have between 295 and 315 students every year. We have a very steady enrollment. We have a very good program we offer. We have a lot about it. It's 45% of our student body comes from outside of the boundaries of Merino. But what's happening right now is that we talked about a 15% cut. Let me put that in perspective for you. That means about $530,000 for us, okay? When you're in DPS, that doesn't seem like a lot of money. but in perspective, let's think about this in terms of entire budget. When I go through and I do the budgeting process, I know about 75% of my budget is about pay, teacher pay, and benefits. And I know other districts are up to 85%. I get that. But I'm just using our numbers. So 75% of our budget is used for pay and for health insurance and different kinds of benefits that we give to teachers. We have about another 10 to 15% that we have no control over. That's like paying the gas bill, the electric bill, fuel, some of those things that we have no control over. So then we have about another 10 to 15% that I actually get to toy with, if that's the proper word, but it's not really toy with, it's just be able to allocate to different things. So for example, how much do we give teachers for classroom supplies? How much do we allow for staff development, things like that? When you break that down in those terms, in a $3.6 million budget before the negative factor, but a $3.2 million budget after the negative factor, and now with these cuts, about a $2.9 million budget, I have about $400,000 a year that I actually get as discretionary kinds of things that I can move around. And so when you talk about 75% of your staff, of your dollars are tied up into staff, when you talk about a $500,000 cut or $530,000 cut, you do the math. It means staff. And think about it again. We are a one-track elementary, meaning that we have one first grade teacher, one second grade teacher, and so on and so on. In the secondary, we're just large enough to need 1.5 teachers per grade level or per subject, but not large enough to need 2. We've gone beyond the time of where we find a lot of specialists who are able to do math and science, for example, or English and social studies. And so you can't hire somebody to teach 2 periods of social studies in the junior high in a single day, because they won't come from Denver or Colorado Springs or someplace else to come live in Sterling or Merino to teach for a $15,000 a year contract. You just won't do it. So we had to offer full-time contracts to those people. So now we have 2 teachers per subject in our secondary. Well, now what we have to do is we have to start looking at what are we going to do to streamline that. We are talking about we want to look at staying away from the classroom as much as possible. But that can't happen. So one of the things we're doing is we are a founding member of the Student Centered Accountability Program. And one of the things that we did is we identified that, when we have, and we're no different than any other rural school district in the state of Colorado. We don't have a curriculum specialist. We don't have written curriculum. We don't have pacing guides. We don't have all that stuff that they have in larger districts. When a new teacher walks in the building, you hand them the textbook and you say, get after it. That's your curriculum. And that's not fair to teachers. That's not fair to kids. And that's not fair to our community. So we, in the last 3 years, have really put forth an effort to hire an outside person to come work with our staff to have us write and align curriculum K through 12 so that we can offer the same kinds of opportunities to our kids in Merino that are offered in Cherry Creek, for example. But because of these cuts, that costs, in order to do that, I had to add 5 days to the calendar at a cost of $50,000. That's going to go by the wayside. And I think that's going to hurt kids in the long run. That's going to hurt our profession in the long run. And if it goes through at 15%, it's also going to mean some of my secondary staff and some of my paraprofessionals are possibly going to have to lose positions. We did recently, as part of our student-centered accountability project program, identified that mental health, as all of us have those issues, mental health is an issue in our district. So 2 years ago, we went ahead and hired a phenomenal young man to come be a mental health specialist in our district. One of the questions I got from one of my board members the other night was, are we going to be able to continue that? My thought is, coming out of this, we're going to have more issues around mental health than we've ever had. So while he's on the table, he's not on the table. But where are we going to cut instead? And so this is really hitting us hard in terms of, particularly in small schools. And I hate to think of like a little school like Lone Star, who has 98 kids or 102 kids, and they've got to cut 15% of their budget when they're one track completely all the way through. So it becomes a choice of, do I teach math this year or do I not teach math this year? And that is a very difficult choice to have. And so I was asked to come on tonight to talk about how that impacts, how these cuts are going to impact particularly rural schools. I want to say that it's going to impact it's going to impact our rural schools big, really big, but it's going to impact every single district across this state. And the only option we have is to find some way to make 271 get on the ballot. We got to find a way to get the signatures. We got to find a way to get this thing passed. And we've got to find a way to finally fund our schools, because if this does not pass, we will not see this kind of funding that we currently have with the negative factor for many, many, many years to come. And if we think that cuts are bad this year, wait until the next year if something's not done with the conundrum we have between Tabor and Gallagher. And so I appreciate everything you guys have done here. I'm getting ready to get out on the road and get some signatures and do some things as soon as we can get some things wrapped up at school. But I'm, again, really appreciative of having this opportunity to talk to you guys. And we thought we were, we really thought we were in trouble 9 years ago. We didn't know trouble. This is trouble. And I really fear for where we're headed as a state if something can't be done. So with that, I know this is, I rambled on. I did my, kind of just didn't let anybody even ask any questions, but just rambled on, but I'm very passionate about this, and I want to make sure that we can find some way to get more dollars into our school. And those of you who think the federal dollars that just came in, great. We love the federal dollars, fantastic, but they're so tied up into so many things related to COVID when I just need to pay my people. And I don't know how I'm going to pay my people. So anyway, that's where we're at. And I will hand that back to Annalise. And if anybody had any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Man, a lot of information for one, and just a reality check of where we're at, even prior to the impact of COVID, and understanding what these cuts are really going to, where they're really going to be hitting. It's literally in the classroom. And just as a point to make, just so everyone knows, after our speakers, when we're in small groups, we'll actually be able to answer a lot of the questions you all have been sending and be able to discuss more in detail, and also even ask some of our speakers for more information of their perspectives as well. Thank you again, Superintendent Sanders, and I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Healer Auset Ali, founder and executive director of Visions Performing Arts Company.
Hey y'all, can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
Thank you. So ditto to everyone else's perspective. Thank you gentlemen for sharing. I'm not going to repeat what we've already heard. I'm going to address, we were set to open this next school year. We were set to open our school in fall of 2020. And because of the projected cuts, it only made sense for us to say, let's take another year to not open and let's get in on the equity work. So I want to kind of talk to, I do a lot of consulting with equity, education equity, and our principal is actually in his doctoral program for education equity. And the three things that we were, well, the five things we were focused on outside of what everyone else has said was arts access and extracurricular access for students, because we know how important that is, family engagement, social emotional learning, and the whole health of the well-being of our teachers, right? Because for us, a lot of our teachers, literally, we've had to make the space and time to give them emotional support during this time, especially our teachers who had students graduating and all of that. The funding cuts for community-based schools like ours, and schools that have been designed with the community, what it's going to impact is that we are a school designed for access. So, right, so like Great Ed Colorado is like our big cousin, right? Like this is who we kind of mimic, saying like, we want access to great education. And so let's build this institution and have great partnerships that we can do that. Well, when we don't have the funding to ensure extracurricular things, and we all know that these things help with whole child, right? And so it's not even, so we're really interested, in addition to everything that everyone else has said, we're also interested in how is this going to impact programming? How is this going to, teachers get stipend for doing these extra programs, right? They get the opportunity to engage with families. And our model is even designed to where not only are you stipend, but you're also celebrated, right? And so it's an attractive thing for teachers to come in and work with us, because they get to celebrate authentically who they are. And so now we're in this situation where we're like, that's a big cut. And we already are dealing with the underserved population. Our school is intentional about special education, Black and brown students, and closing those opportunity gaps. And so it's, our concern is, yes, there's definitely, obviously we can meet the need of access for technology. And it's also these, it's not just academics that we should be thinking about in our classrooms. What about our social emotional learning? What about our access for teachers having that social emotional support and their mental health, and making sure, because teachers who can't afford to take care of their families are often coming into the classroom stressed. And so we need to get this initiative out there. We need to get as many people behind this as possible, because it's even more than, we know the biggest impact is the classroom, but the institution of schools are beacons in our communities, right? There's some schools that have, there's a school here in Aurora that have a whole child approach where you can get social services at their school. Like, all of these things require great funding, and funding that can sustain the model so that we can really meet the needs of our communities. And those of us who represent our community and we're in education, it's also, it's heavy. I mean, it's just heavy. It's just heavy work. And we have to get these stories out louder. We have to listen to our students. Our students are becoming more aware of what funding means to different schools when they're traveling to one school to even play sports, and they see their school looks different than their home school, right? And so, like, being able to bring this broad awareness, and we are really intentional about that family engagement. So we want to help our families get educated. We want to help our families understand great initiatives like this. We also want to ensure that they understand the importance of their vote, that they understand that they have rights as parents and families, and that they can come in and actually advocate in a way. And we've been we've had some great results during all of this, and seeing parents being able to advocate in a new way, learning what SPED rights are, and learning all of their appropriate education that you would think they would have been given already. And so there's also these other pieces. Yes to money, yes to the classroom, and a good institution is a whole beacon for our communities, right? And it serves as a place where the community knows there's safety, there's trust, and there's security. And the bodies in that building deserve to be honored in a way that of appreciation through proper funding. So without repeating what everyone else has said, I just wanted to kind of touch on those things. You know, the additional programming matters to students, especially students who are behind in the opportunity gap, giving them something to still be fulfilled in school, and giving them incentives to saying, you know, listen, in your arts program, this is the requirement, making sure you're getting your homework in. Those type of efforts ensure that we all have just a full, well-rounded program. And our teachers have been struggling to figure that out. And we just heard all of the stats and the numbers nationally where we are in Colorado. And we have to do something about that, because it's unfair. It's really unfair.
I 100% agree, Auset, and I appreciate your willingness to share the experience and decisions. It was a tough decision. I remember having to share out to the community that was expecting a safer space for those students to be able to flourish, and appreciate you being vulnerable and speaking to it, and this reinforcing why, for one, funding has always been an issue, and then two, why how COVID has seriously caused some severe impacts, and we just can't wait any longer. And I definitely benefited myself from after school programming and developed probably better in some of those spaces. So I hope that if folks are interested in supporting your movement and your school, they will be able to follow up with us, and we can connect them with you as well. We still have a couple more speakers, just so we have a time check. We have two more speakers who have amazing perspectives to share. We have our student voice next with Miss Michaela Lee, and she is a student at CU and a YASPA intern. So we're gonna hand it off to Miss Michaela, and thank you so much, Auset. And I would love to hear the student perspective of how COVID has impacted and the work you're doing in the education system.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me today. So as you know, I am going to be giving a new perspective sort of on what's been going on with like funding during COVID-19. And to give some background, at YASPA, I co-teach a social justice course at ACCA, which is a branch off of Aurora Central, for students who are missing a couple credits to graduate or are on track to graduate early. And so basically what we've been doing to sort of engage the students during this new remote learning is we've been providing them with surveys each week to get an idea of what they're feeling on things, how we can help them financially or emotionally or whatever they need. And we've just been asking them a couple questions, and there's some things that I have like found from reading their responses. But one of the first things that I realized when we transitioned to remote learning was that a lot of the inequities that we had for the budget for funding for the students, a lot of those issues would just be worse after COVID-19. So some of the things that I had in mind were a couple of my students had children. And a lot of the times they wouldn't show up to school because they had to take care of their kids. So at ACCA, we had a lot of issues with lack of childcare. And from our surveys, that is still an issue for our students. They are having issues working while also taking care of their kids, and there's no outlet for them to have that. And then in addition to that, they always say that like, it's a privilege to have your life stop during this pandemic, because most people can afford to stop working. They have to go to work to provide for their family. And we have some students who go to work to provide for their whole family, their siblings, their parents, the whole thing. And then also, we had very little engagement with our remote learning. And part of it is due to students just not having access to our Google Classroom. And we did the best we could to try to provide them with links to free Wi-Fi and such, but it's just, from what I saw from the outside, the school wasn't doing a lot to try to push the students to stay engaged during this time. And then another thing that was an issue prior to COVID-19 was a lack of counselors. We had a lot of seniors who were about to graduate and had never once spoken to their counselor in the 4 years that they'd been going to school. And I had done a survey to ask them whether or not they had been in contact with their counselor during this time, and still hardly any engagement from their counselors. And the way I see it is there was a lack of funding to help with all of those issues prior to COVID-19, and I think that there is a lack of funding now to help it. And then some of the things I've also seen is there are a couple things that we have been fighting for funding for a very long time prior to COVID-19, and now that this pandemic has happened, some of those things that we've been fighting for have been happening. So like, for example, I'm working on a transit equity campaign in order to get free bus passes for students and concurrent enrollment. And we've been fighting for that for the past for a while now. And we see that RTD has free bus fares. So it's just interesting to me that we fight so hard for funding for our students, but then as soon as something like this happens, it's so easy to make that happen. And in addition to this, a lot of our students, their computers didn't work if they did have them in class. And I found out that once the pandemic started, most schools were offering students free computers to take home to use for remote learning. So again, it's just interesting to me that we fight so hard for that for our students, and it's now that they're giving it to them, and only some of them, because I spoke to a student who said that her sister got a computer from the school. It didn't work, so they tried to contact the school to get a new one, and the sister just never ended up getting a new computer. So now they have to share a computer for their schoolwork. So even then, they are providing some stuff to help the students, but not enough to where each student can feel like they have access. And then for me specifically in college, some of the things that I've been experiencing is they told us that the the online summer class fees would be waived because there's no choice but to take them online. But they're still overly expensive. So I was lucky enough to have scholarships to be able to pay for that, but for anybody who can't afford the price of summer classes, then it's just not an option for them. And then because of COVID-19, they're further away from getting their degree. And in addition to this, we have a wellness center at CU Denver, and a lump sum gets taken out of our tuition, or gets put into our tuition that we pay for the wellness center. And at this time, nobody's allowed to use the wellness center, but we're still getting charged for the wellness center fee. And then I had a friend tell me that apparently RTD is still charging students for a reoccurring fee, even though they aren't able to use the bus passes at this time, and they probably won't for the fall. And then one of the other major issues for a lot of university students is the fact that they're not being reimbursed for their on-campus living rent. So a lot of students have been struggling to pay rent at this time when they're at home staying safe. And then, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the responses that we got from our students in our surveys. And one week I asked my students, if you could ask the policymakers to set aside money in the school budget for one thing, what would it be? And some of them said things like a better computer. One of them wanted a better classroom desk. And then one of them wanted better pay for our teachers. And what is the most upsetting to me about this whole situation is that it is obviously possible for us to help these students with their needs, as we've seen with the free computers, and then they're also giving out free meals for students that need them. But yeah, I still have students asking for better desks when we go back in the fall. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Wow, very revealing perspectives from the people who, kids, I say kids, I'm still in teacher mode, from students who are really directly impacted by the decisions being made by administration and the experience of remote learning and having to balance life, school, and work. Thank you. And maybe we could also follow up with you and get some of those data points to share out as well. And I just want to let you all know we have our last speaker, who is Miss Deb Sims-Fard, and she is an educator and parent, as well as a parent advocacy coach and the founder of JF STEM Institute. Our next speaker, Miss Fard.
Good evening, everyone. It is of course, it's an honor to be here to talk about something that I think that we obviously are all passionate about, and that is making sure that all students have equitable and inclusive access to what is most important for their future, and that is education. I'm going to say that I was Mr. Sanders, I believe. Thank you for reminding me that in this conversation of equity and inclusion, that we are forgetting our further out brothers and sisters in the conversation of funding. And I think sometimes larger cities forget that there are others are part of the Colorado conversation in funding, and we need to remember that. I also want to say to Great Ed, you know, your AKA name should be the little train that could, because no matter what happens, you are always at the forefront of reminding all of us that funding for schools and education should be a priority, and you try to always push that envelope. And so, you know, I'm always appreciative of that. I want to talk a little bit about, and I think I heard one person mention this, but it is interesting to me that we always throw out the idiom or quote that as a parent, you are the first teacher. However, parents are usually the last to be engaged, the last to be invited into the advocacy of their children's education. I am a parent advocacy education coach, and I also do a lot of work around culturally responsive pedagogy. And I think that in this conversation of funding, parents have been left out of the information and out of the conversation. And I do not know that that is going to benefit us well. What I do appreciate is that, once again, Great Ed is on the cutting edge in terms of making sure that they are providing training to support parents in their advocacy walk. I think that it behooves us all to further engage our parents and inform our parents on how they can become a more powerful voice in their children's education by inviting them to the conversation and making sure that we are not leaving them out of the conversation and how they can support bringing funding to the table. It is a collective voice that is going to make this happen. And in all of the scenarios that I've heard, if we can engage our parents to, one, carry a petition for their families, if we can engage our parents in how their voice is absolutely a necessary voice, and how we can make that a not so burdensome process, I think that we all win. So I don't have a big spiel around this. What I know is that I believe that parents are the first teachers. I believe that most parents want to see their children do well. They don't always know how to advocate for what that looks like. But I think in this conversation, as we are talking about funding, there needs to be the conversation of how we can bring them to the table as a powerful and critical voice in the conversation of making sure that we have equity and inclusion as it relates to funding. And so I want to, again, thank you for having me. And I hope that in our chat rooms, we can talk about ways to further engage our parents. And that's all, folks.
and you know what, man, we could have ended it there. Thanks, Deb, taking us home. But we actually have been getting some questions in the group chat, and you know what, thank you so much for all of the speakers for giving their time, and for everyone who has been on the Zoom session with us. We are going to actually have an opportunity to answer some of those questions that have been posed in the chat, including from Ms. Sydney. How can teachers inform parents about this advocacy when teachers are supposed to stay nonpartisan? So when you break off into our breakout rooms, that's actually a really good kickoff question for you, because that's what we want you to do, is come up together with a plan of action. And so we do have the parent breakout room, and hopefully we make sure you're in that. And you signed up for that when you initially registered. So if you should be able to speak to that and get more information. We will be able to share some of the parts of the recording, and so it'll be in like snippets, and we can follow up with you all. And we're going to have only about 5 minutes for our breakout, but that just means we want to keep this same energy and be able to talk to each other briefly about an action plan, and type in, what are you going to commit to doing? What have you committed to doing? And then ask maybe 1 or 2 people in the breakout to share. We will be cut off if at 5 minutes once we break out, to come back together and hear the great ask for and get more specific information regarding 271 and its impact, and how it is the solution. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. We're going to do our 5-minute breakout with the intention to come up with an action plan, share what you're willing to do, what you have done, and what you could use support doing, and just like those other questions. So we're going to start seeing us be split off. Don't get scared if you've never done a Zoom breakout. It's pretty cool. You'll get to meet some of the other registrants, and also if you're in the particular room with our speakers, you'll be able to connect with them as well.
All right, everyone. Looks like we're getting folks rolling back in here. Just want to make sure I wait until everyone's pulled back in before I start talking. Thank you, everyone, for all that you shared. I know that there's, a lot of really heavy stuff that we're sharing that's going on in all sorts of different districts. So we just really appreciate getting to hear perspectives, not just from speakers, but from you all that are in attendance today. So thank you again for being here and for talking about this. So we wanted to end on a happy note, that happy note being that we do have a way to make sure that these cuts are not quite as deep as we are looking at right now. And we want to make sure that you all know what that looks like and how to make that happen. So I'm going to answer all the questions about Initiative 271 and talk through a little bit now about what Initiative 271 is and why it's so important. So if we can go to the next slide, Nicole. All right, so I'm not going to make you read all this, but I wanted to make sure you see this. You have an idea of what this is going to look like on the ballot. So Initiative 271, here's the actual title language for it. And I'm going to break this down. We've broken it down into a blue section that talks about what it does, a green section that says how it's going to do it, and then an orange section that talks about what the money will be used for once we get that money. So we are, as it says in blue, we are going to be increasing taxes by $2 billion annually by making an amendment to the Constitution. We have to start it out that way. Unfortunately, due to our Constitution, it says any measure that would be raising taxes, you have to start it out with shall taxes be increased by. So the green section is repealing the constitutional requirement for a single rate income tax. And then if you want to go to the next slide here, Nicole, this tax table here shows exactly what they're going to put in place of that single rate income tax. So essentially, anyone who makes $250,000 or below are going to see a 4.58% tax, their taxes decrease down to 4.58%. So everyone's first $250,000 will lower to that 0.05 lower rate. So that's everyone's $250,000, their first $250,000. Income above that, so folks that make more than $250,000, they are going to see a slight gradual tax increases as they get closer to 1 million and above. But I want to be clear that it's just the 250 to 500K that will see that increase to 7%. It's just the 500K to the 1 million that will see that increase to 7.75%. So even if you make $1 million a year, that first 250,000 will still see that slight tax decrease. So it's just in those increments. So all this together would affect 95% of Coloradans would actually see a slight tax cut, only the top 5% of Coloradans, and that's based on last year's data. After this year, unfortunately, probably even less Coloradans fall into those higher brackets of income. So only based on last year's data, only 5% of Coloradans would see a tax increase. And so then on the next slide here, this is actually the language. Nicole, if you want to just go to the next slide here. Thank you. Let's see. The next slide, this slide shows that how the revenue will actually be used. So once we get all of that revenue in, the up to $2 billion, this is actually the language that's in the measure itself. So this is exactly what it says in the measure. So pre-primary through 12 education would get 50% of that. And it would specifically go towards recruiting, retaining, and paying teachers and student service providers. Because we're a local control state, once it's delegated to all of the different districts, the school boards at that district would decide exactly what it means to recruit, retain, and pay teachers and how they want to make sure they spend that money at the local level. It might mean that some districts really need more mental health professionals, and so they'll use this money to increase pay for mental health professionals. It might be that some districts really want to give all of their teachers a pay raise. It just depends on what's best for that district and how they decide to spend that money. There is the supplement, not supplant language in there to make sure that if this money goes into K-12, it doesn't get taken out in another way. And then the other 50% goes towards addressing the impacts of a growing population and a changing economy. That gives the legislature some flexibility, which we're actually pretty excited that this was in the measure now, especially considering all of the changing economy issues that we're going to need to deal with because of COVID-19. So I know we've got some questions here in the chat, and it looks like Nicole is doing a great job answering them. But I want to make sure they all get answered. So there's a question here that says, so is 500K for married couples? So it would be whether you file individually or jointly. So if a couple is married but files separately, it would impact their separate taxes. If they're jointly filing, it would impact their income altogether. So if they make over $250,000 together and they're filing jointly, that means it would impact that over $250,000 jointly. Let's see here. Nicole, are there questions that that you haven't answered that I need to address?
I think the question from Priscilla should be addressed. Just that, how are we reaching out to more people than just parents with kids currently in school? And how are we going to get more support than just the people who are currently directly affected by P through 12 schools right now?
Yeah, so how are we going to get more support? Awesome. So what strategies have had success in the past getting broad support across all groups? Well, actually, the coalition that came up with this measure actually is broadly supported and was created by now it's over 60 organizations all across the board. So because this is not just going towards education, it's going towards education and giving the legislature some flexibility around what else to put this into. We have a ton of groups that are involved with this, all the way from housing groups, environmental, we have fiscal policy groups, we've got public health and healthcare groups, transportation groups, higher ed, all across the board. So we've got a lot of support, and they are seeing revenue shortfalls just as much as we are. So they're figuring out messaging to their groups and exactly what that looks like for them. And that's how they're really trying to bring those in, which is pretty unprecedented in the past. There have been a lot of measures like this, but they've really been kind of single issue focused, like just education, just transportation, etc. So this is really exciting to see so many groups that have come together. Let's see. Oh, and Sydney, the actual ballot language is, we will make sure and send that around to everyone afterwards. We've got a lot of folks that, we've got a lot of information that we can send around. We'll send around the links to everybody so you can go search more and learn more if you would like to learn more about it. Let's see. And then as far as accountability goes, there is actually a measure, or there's a language in the measure that would make sure that there's two kind of commissions that the measure pulls together. One is the Fair Tax Commission, which actually would go after 10 years, it would look back on how the money was spent and how we are addressing the actual tax table, and it's very specific on the 25 people that it asks to pull together, and it would make sure that that the funding that we've received from this over the past 10 years has gone to the right places, as well as has been that the tax table still makes sense for our economy. So that's something that's in place, as well as every year the legislature has to convene a group of an accountability group that would essentially look and say, does the way that this is being spent fall under the recruit, retain, and pay teachers, as well as the impacts of a growing population and changing economy. So essentially, there's an accountability mechanism put in place for a yearly check, as well as one every 10 years that's more in depth. So those are kind of the accountability mechanisms. Let's see, examples of impacts of a growing population, like Annalie said, roads, public investments. Say, for example, transportation is really impacted by a growing population because we have more people driving. We need to fix our roads more. If we have an increased amount of folks who are on unemployment. We've got, healthcare needs there. We've got a lot of different things that are affected by a changing economy and a growing population that can be addressed with these dollars. And so we had a question come in about virtual petitions. I'm going to address this really briefly. So there was an executive order put out by the governor's office that did say that we are going to, that they would like to have us have virtual petitions that would essentially mean that we could get petitions in, mail them out to folks, and then they could scan and email them back. It would also allow for single signatures on petitions and for remote notarization. Unfortunately, at this time, that executive order is facing a lawsuit, and so we are not going to be relying on that executive order until the lawsuit is cleared up. And then once it is cleared up, we still have to wait for the Secretary of State to create the formatting of the single line petitions and create all of the different guidelines and rules around that executive order before we can really do anything with virtual petitions. So we'll keep everyone posted on that, but for now, we're going to move forward as is. So we've got a lot of great questions here, but I do want to go ahead and move forward. Let's go to the next slide, Nicole, and talk a little bit more about the polling and what we're going to be, how we're getting this on the ballot. So as Lisa talked about earlier, 68% of Coloradans in our polling show that they would prefer an increase of taxes on the wealthy over making cuts into the state budget like we've talked about today. 56% said that they would vote yes on the ballot measure right now if they were reading just that title language. So that title language you saw earlier that said, shall taxes be increased by, you would think a lot less people would be excited about that, but 56% said that they would vote yes, and only 28% said they would vote no. These numbers were, this polling was done. We've actually had two sets of polling done, one by the campaign and one by the by Colorado Education Association, and both of those came out with similar results. Keating Research is one of the top pollsters in the state, and they were the ones that conducted these polls. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So let's talk about how we get this on the ballot. I know this is what everyone has been waiting for, and we are currently going to be continuing gathering signatures through petitions. We want to make it really clear that we are only asking people to gather at the level at which they're comfortable. So if that means that folks are comfortable requesting a mail petition by going to fairtaxcolorado.org, requesting a petition to be mailed to them, we send them the petition, and then they sign it. They have whoever they live with in quarantine sign it, and then they get it notarized and send it back. That's great. There are lots of other ways that kind of increase in that comfortability of how comfortable folks are going out and gathering signatures. But we want to make sure that as people are gathering signatures, they are observing the signature and wearing a volunteer circulator name tag. So you're making sure that you're complying with circulation rules. And then we also want to make sure that folks are complying with safer at home social distancing guidelines, which means wear a mask, maintain a 6-foot distance, provide sanitized pens, or have folks bring their own pens, and then ask signers to sanitize their hands before and after signing. So being very careful with this. And I'm going to go through some examples of what that looks like. If you want to go to the next slide, Nicole. So this is one by our volunteer, Adie Tate, who was actually on this call earlier but had to jump off for a DAC meeting. She had a front porch and neighborhood signing station. She set it on her front porch. She had one of our printable color in. If you have kids that need some activities, we have a coloring sheet of a Fair Tax Colorado logo, and put that on a table. As you can see, she's got Clorox wipes, hand sanitizer, a one-pager about the initiative, the petition in there, but opened all the way so that people don't have to flip it back, so there's minimal contact. And then it's a little bit hard to see, but she had a blank, an empty pen holder, and then a pen holder filled with sanitized pens so people could take the pen, sign it, and put it in the dirty pen cup. So really, really safe way to do this, making sure that folks are staying as safe as possible while still getting signatures. So this is a great way to go about it. We're also starting a mobile petition carrier effort where people are setting up a mobile petition station in the back of their car and then driving around to their neighbors and friends and family and having them sign out of the back of their car with a similar setup to this, which is a really great way to get involved as well. That's something where if anyone's interested in doing that, we can send them around to some signers or some folks that are interested in signing around their own community. So let's go to the next slide, Nicole. So resources, we've got a lot of resources for you. And as I said, we will make sure and send these around as soon as this is over. But we have at fairtaxcolorado.org, you can actually go in and see what Fair Tax Colorado would do to your effective tax rate. So you just type in your annual income and it shows you exactly how it would impact you directly. So whether it would give you a tax cut, a slight tax increase, etc. You can go and donate. You can endorse as an individual or as an organization. Every endorsement counts, even if you're not part of an organization. It's great to see individuals endorsing as well. You can also request a presentation. We'll come talk to your community group, your group of friends, if you have a board of an organization, really any group of people that might want to learn more about Fair Tax Colorado. We're happy to do presentations to learn more about what this measure is and how to get involved. And then, of course, you can also sign up to sign or carry a petition. And we will make sure and send this around to everyone after this is over, like I said. And I believe that's all I have for you today as far as Fair Tax Colorado goes. I'm happy to, I know there's maybe a few more questions, but let's see. Are there any other questions that haven't been answered? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask or throw it into the chat.
I don't know that this is a comment or a question as much as it is a comment. I wonder how we get stories like, and I put this in the chat, how we get stories like Rob's out, that we have a lot of districts that have been incredibly fiscally responsible. We have state agencies that have been very fiscally responsible. But what we know is that when it comes time for budget cuts or budget questions, that's usually the first line of attack for people that don't want a new tax or don't want something, which is, have you not been efficient? How have you looked at every line of your budget? Have you made sure that you can't spend it? And so I guess my piece is, how do we get out materials that really emphasize that we have superintendents like Rob, and I know Jackie, you're on the phone call, who have been incredibly fiscally responsible, but this is going to kill them. This is going to kill their districts. And getting that message out instead of just, like, how's it going to be spent?
I think that's a great question. And I think that's something that Great Ed really tries to make sure people are aware of. But I think that it also has to start with you. I think the trusted messengers in this group are the ones that people are going to listen to. I think that the state could say all day, or big organizations can say all day, this is, superintendents are doing everything they can to make sure that this money is spent well. But at the end of the day, they just don't have enough. But encouraging folks to attend things like this and really starting out getting people interested in this type of thing with trusted messengers is one of the most important ways that we can get this word out. So does anyone else on staff or anyone else at all want to address that? I know it's a question that we are definitely always trying to find a better answer to, but I think, I would say just talking amongst your communities is a really, really great way to get folks informed and involved.
Well, I also think, Betsy, you asked if staff had some suggestions. I definitely believe we need to be reaching out to our legislators, and we actually have the option to do that on our website. And so we do need all legislators to, one, know about 271, and then two, understand what the solution, this is the solution. And someone asked, what else are we doing? Well, the reality is we have to do this. So we've waited, we've experienced what happens when we don't make the right changes. And who suffers are students. Who suffers? Then the community. With an uneducated population, we don't grow. So we have to convince them. You have to invest in education for one. That's top priority. However, we also deserve a fair tax. So that's the other thing. Like, we need to make this fair for the folks who are still working to survive. And the big push needs to be getting our legislators talking about it across the board, not just one side talking. It has to be every side talking about what's a reasonable resolution and solution. And it is this.
Yeah, thank you, Annalise.
Hey, if I can just jump in, this is Dave Young, and I can vouch that not only have school districts been very, very frugal with their budgets, but the entire state has. And we have been operating in a very tight constitutional restrictions for a long time and have done the best we can in order to fashion a budget not only that is balanced, but actually tries to meet the needs of everybody across the state. And we aren't able to do that. We aren't able to do that because we just don't have enough money in order to meet the essential needs of people in the state of Colorado. I know this because I sat 4 years on the Joint Budget Committee and combed through that budget line by line over and over again, looking for those bits of and pieces of funding that would make a difference, and it's just not there.
Thank you, everyone. Our treasurer, Dave Young, thank you so much. If anyone knows our state budget, it's him. So thank you. Let's see, there was a question in the chat. Is there any way that the legislature could be convinced to put 271 on the ballot? Unfortunately, that is something that probably is not going to happen at this point. They really only have a few weeks to be in session and have decided to prioritize, figuring out exactly how they're going to make our budget work this year. So they unfortunately aren't able to do that at this time. So that means it's up to us. And it is 6:30, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I know talking about, taxes in Colorado and budget cuts after your work day or parent day or whatever it is you all were doing is probably a little bit draining, but I really appreciate you all being here. And I really hope that we are able to work together to get this on the ballot. And if anyone does have any other questions or would like to learn more or just, chat with us about anything you heard today, feel free to reach out. My email is betsy@greateducation.org. I'll type that into the chat box. And like I said before, several times, I think, we will send all of this around to everyone to make sure you have the information that you need to follow up on anything you heard today. We really appreciate this, and I hope that these stories were helpful and will help you to think about your own stories. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a great
Betsy.
night.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Lisa.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say hi, Lee, if you're still in here.
How are you?
I'm good, and I now notice that you added Annalise, who's been here, who's been out of our Montbello campus 8,482 times. Like, I feel like I'm going to see all of you at Reimagining Montbello sooner rather than later.
Right. Absolutely. Woohoo.
Thanks, Moira.
So just let me know what you need other than for us to make sure our check gets in.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and we will. Is Betsy still on? No, looks like we will. We will come after. We will have things to do. I'm gonna have Lee do it because I see
say
we've lost my ability to speak.
I don't know. The come after part is a little scary there, Lisa. I'm just saying. I feel like we're under attack a lot up where we are. But yeah, just let me know if there's stories or writing or people I can call or anything I can help with.
Absolutely, we will have a lot of calling, and so Nicole, will you remember to mention to Betsy that we should put Moira at the top of a volunteer list? And actually, we heard that from a couple of people today, so that is awesome.
On the
Yeah.
superstar list. Yes.
Yes. Hey, Maura, are you still in connection with the kids? Because we've got our newsletter rocking and rolling, and we're going to send it out. Are you still involved with the kiddos?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
right
so
on.
yeah,
Okay.
I can get that. Yeah, a couple of them are struggling a little, but yeah, no, we've got emails for all those guys, and I'm very glad that we got the day at the Capitol before COVIDia
Right?
began.
Like 2 weeks, 1 week before.
Yeah. So
Right.
and
Right.
they loved it, by the way, just so you know. Our kids loved it. So
Good. I think we like it. We love it more than they do. So yep. Absolutely.
all right. I just wanted to say hi to everybody, and
Thank you so much, Moira. Hope all is well in your home.
Yeah.
We've got one more week of children, and I'm going to go watch our virtual graduation because we did our senior drive-through last week, and Reimagining Montbello's tomorrow. So it's just a fun jam up in here.
It's a lot. Take care.
So you guys are awesome. Let me know what I can do.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, Jenny just dropped off. I was going to say hi to Jenny. Well,
yeah,
it was awesome.
I thought it went great. Hey, Genesis, what'd you think? My daughter's on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
What'd you think?
It was interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Are you gonna carry Genesis? So, are you gonna carry a petition?
I was thinking about it. When I registered, I was I put down I'm not sure because of all of what's going on.
Okay, well.
You got history though. You got experience.
Right.
I've seen you carry a petition. Back when people used to get together in places.
Right.
Okay, I gotta go to the crazy house. So thank you guys. So I'll jump on the call tomorrow. This was great, guys. This was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. You did an awesome job.
Awesome guy. Okay, guys. Take care.
Bye. Bye, Genesis. Good day.
Bye, Nicole. Bye.
All good, Nicole. I gotta totally rewrite that grant tonight.
I know.
I was so happy I finally got to write something that was like, this is what we're doing with the money, as opposed to we're a C3 and we do. Yeah. But you pulled it off, girl. I'm sorry it was such a hassle that the technology went without.
I'm glad that it looked like we did, because literally all of the breakout rooms didn't save. So when we went to move into breakout rooms, also, we were supposed to be in breakout rooms for a half hour. The speakers talked so long.
That is a lesson that, like, I always forget that about Rob. Rob was one of the people who spoke at our luncheon when we honored superintendents, and he talked for 10 minutes at our luncheon.
He said it's like the same thing that happened Lobby Day 2019. They're all saying great stuff, but we're like, okay, but like, can you be a little more succinct? Like, we need to I really wanted to do some really intimate small group stuff. Like, I wanted it to be like, and then Dave Young was in our small group and he talked most of the time, and Deb was in there too and she talked most of the time. So like, other people didn't really get to
chime in. Our rural one went pretty well.
But I think it did. We had, I feel Ben was fielding the webinar because we still wanted to have someone on there to make sure that like he could redirect. But people, they don't know how to follow directions. So he's like, okay, step 1, copy this. Step 2, exit from the webinar. Oh, crap.
What?
Hold on.